All right, folks, welcome back to the Serious Angler Podcast and another edition of the Real Biology. As always, joined by the one and only Mr. Stephen Barden, and as always, I'm your host Bailey Eichbrett. Steve, another
Bailey,
wild show today, dude.
week in, week out, banger after banger. This guy, I didn't know. We met him at Black Bass 2025. I mean, I knew him, but I knew him from email, right? Like, that's not real.
Mm-hmm. It's
I,
not
I
really
wish we
fake news.
got, it was fake news, dude. I wish we got more time with him one on one at the meeting, but you and I got to sit down with him and record this after the meeting back home. We had plenty of time. It's a lengthy episode, but it's worth it. And being a lengthy episode, man, I'm cool. Let's introduce everybody to Ryan Gary from Maryland of all places, and his cool work with forward facing sonar.
A touchy subject, obviously, that needs no introduction right now, but a great episode. Now, like if you're coming here looking for polarizing for or against thoughts, you're not going to get that. You're going to get data and factual driven
Mhm.
discussion about forward facing sonar and its usage without and it's really cool the study that Ryan is putting together, and note that this is just year one. There's more coming,
Yeah,
more
this is year
variables,
one.
and it's really cool what he's found already, and
Mhm.
what he's going to be continue looking at going forward.
Yep, love it. You're gonna love this episode. Stay tuned because it's not just all forward facing sonar. We get into other topics eventually, so stay with us.
Yep. Pretty dang cool one. Definitely stay tuned. Whether you're for or against technology, this is a great discussion and one that's very insightful. And use this as, if you are for or against forward facing sonar, use this to educate yourselves.
Yep,
Whether,
love it.
regardless of your purview, it's always good to learn more about the technology. That way, when you do have a actual civilized conversation with someone, you could say, "Hey, I listened to this podcast. It's literally a legitimate fisheries
Mhm.
biologist within a state agency that ran an experiment with actual data, and now you
Mhm.
can use that towards whether forming your opinion, things like that, versus just emotion."
And the data was collected independently of him using Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour, so you know the anglers that were actually catching fish, and they weren't aware that they were part of a study, so they have no influence on the results.
Yeah, there's no manipulation of this data.
It's
It's literally
amazing.
not possible.
It's
Uh,
amazing.
Yes. So I think without further ado, we just got to get into the show.
Let's get it, y'all. Introduction to Ryan Gary, one of the all stars of the fisheries world.
The sucker going. Still got us, Ryan?
Yep.
Cool. All right, folks. Welcome back to the Serious Angler Podcast and another edition of the Real Biology. Steve, we have a spicy one for folks today. A great one. And one, I have to say, one of my favorite presentations from last week at the Black Bass Symposium. So kind of kick us off, Steve. Where are we headed on today's show?
Well, first of all, Ryan proved to everybody he's a superstar in the making, a young superstar, and I kind of felt like this was coming. Ryan reached out to me 6 months ago and asked a pointed question about forward-facing sonar and Major League Fishing and the data we collect, and was like, "Can I have the data? I'll put it together. I'll present it." And you know me, Bailey. I love hungry people with a big vision that are like, "Hey, let's tackle an issue." So this episode, we are going to tackle a little bit of forward facing technology. And I wouldn't say you and I have avoided it in the past. It just hasn't really came up. So Ryan's going to go through, we're going to ask him a lot of questions about what he's learned from Major League Fishing and kind of where the industry is going. Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show. Can't wait for the world to get to know the man that we met last week.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you guys having me on. I appreciate the kind words. You know, I've heard, when I first saw the new format for Major League Fishing last year, I know Bailey as a the angler might have thought strategy and a couple different things, or a couple, how he would handle the tournament scene. But the first thing that popped out to me when I saw that new format was this is set up perfectly for an experimental design. And I know a lot of other people thought that as well, but I'm very appreciative of you working with Major League Fishing and Major League Fishing being open to working with fisheries scientists and fisheries researchers like myself to tackle some of these questions. And I think this is really where tournament fishing and science can really pair well. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on here, and appreciate the opportunity to work with the data and help advance our knowledge of what's going on in the world right now.
Awesome. Yeah. And then we're going to get into it. I don't want to assume anything in this episode. So I'm going to start with explaining what the Bass Pro Tour is and explaining what the forward facing sonar rule was this year. Because I think, that's a level set for us. So Bass Pro Tour is part of Major League Fishing. This year, we fished 60 anglers, and those anglers competed on day 1 and day 2 full field. And then we cut down to 19 anglers for day 3 because the winner of those first 2 days got an auto bid to the championship, and the championship was 10 days. All anglers fish 3 periods, and a period is 2.5 hours. All anglers have an official on the boat. They use a Bubba Pro Series scale, and the fish are weighed and released on the boat. So it's a catch, weigh, and release format. Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour uses a every fish counts. So it's cumulative weight, and the legal weight for the event is set by the Fisheries Management Division, which is led by myself. And we work with the state agencies to set a weight that would be a legal size fish based on what is legally allowed to be caught based on length. So there's like a equation we use. Most often that lands between 1.5 pounds and 2 pounds, if not right on the nose at 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds. This year, the rule was an angler was allowed to choose any period, 1 period a day, to use forward-facing sonar. So that means 2 periods a day, the angler didn't have forward-facing sonar. The official that's on the boat, whenever an angler catches a fish, brings it in legally, the official weighs the fish. After the official and the angler agree on the weight, the fish is released. The official sits down in the boat, and the official records the species of fish, of course, the weight off of the Bubba scale. And then the iPad has some questions in it. And one of the questions is, basically, is the angler using forward-facing sonar or not? They declare that at the beginning of a period. And then within the catch, were they using forward-facing sonar? So there's an opportunity for angler to have the forward-facing sonar on or declare it to be their forward-facing sonar period, but not actually be using it. Never before have we been able to basically quantify effort in this way. It's of course, forward-facing sonar is new, but we do it for other things as well. We have lure type, we have habitat type, we have depth ranges, we have different data types that our officials are collecting. And then our iPads give us a GPS location and a time and a date. So we have this robust data set. And Ryan has taken every event, and I'll let you kind of take it from there, Ryan, with how you divided up the events, and tell it to us in non-scientific terms.
I'll try my best, and stop me if I need to clarify something. But we took every event, and the Bass Pro Tour has multiple events. But as we were concerned, you have the heavy hitters, which is Smith Mountain Lake, so that's forward-facing sonar the entire time. So we just took the Bass Pro Tour events when they were limited to the rules that Steve just mentioned. And for the analysis that I presented at San Antonio last week at the Black Bass Symposium, I just focused on the first 2 days of the event when we had the entire full field. I think down the line, we'll start looking into some of those other variables on day 3 and day 4 when the field gets a little bit more limited. But I wanted a good comparison, and I wanted the most amount of data I could get from those 2 days. So we looked at just those first 2 days. And then I started to look at what periods were forward facing and what periods were not. And generally speaking, we used 2 different analyses. And the first one grouped all forward facing sonar periods together. So if you spent a period fishing with forward facing sonar, the amount of fish you caught in that period was lumped into one category. And then I took all the other periods from those anglers where they were not using forward facing sonar and I compared their catch rates. So essentially, because of the format, we know that you're fishing for 2.5 hours. And so I can essentially say, you caught 10 fish in 2.5 hours, and I can calculate that catch rate. So 10
Correct.
fish divided by 2.5 hours. And that's your catch per unit effort. And that unit of effort is 1 hour. So I can compare that catch rate using forward facing sonar to not using forward facing sonar. Um, and we compared all of the anglers, we put all of them into one category, mainly to decrease some of the variation that we would see for that particular analysis. So whether you used forward facing sonar in the morning or whether you used it in the afternoon, you might have had better conditions in the morning versus the afternoon. So by putting them all into that category, it kind of accounts for that variation throughout the day. And the second analysis we did was very similar, um, but it was different in regard that we compared an individual angler's effort when using forward facing sonar to the rest of the day when he was not using forward facing sonar. So, for instance, just to grab a name, if Ott Defo used forward facing sonar in the morning, I would calculate that catch rate in the morning and I would compare his catch rate to that first period to the second periods, second and third period throughout the day. So instead of, if this makes sense, and I see Bailey kind of nodding his head, so I feel like I'm doing an okay explanation. But if this makes sense, the first is comparing all anglers using forward-facing sonar to all anglers not using forward-facing sonar. And the second method is comparing an angler to himself and then looking at all the differences between those anglers. And by doing that, we can account for angler variation. So if an angler is better at using forward-facing sonar than another angler, if he's using a different tactic that day out on the lake than other anglers, so we can kind of account for a variety of variation, if that makes sense, by using these two different methods. But we also had a couple assumptions that I think it's really important to point out, and that some anglers throughout the day who did not catch a fish directly using forward facing sonar were not classified as forward facing sonar. So there were some events, like the Potomac River, for instance, not to bring up names, but Ott Defo, again, he won that event. And the last day, the championship day, he did not use forward facing sonar at all. And
Right.
so he would not have been able to be used in that second analysis because we can't compare a period where he was using forward facing sonar to not. So he would be included in that first analysis when he's lumped into the entire group, but not the second when we're comparing anglers to themselves. And so that's another thing. And so we can see some differences in the analysis and in the results from those two methods for that as well. Another assumption that we made was that forward-facing sonar was assumed to affect the entire period when it was used. So if you caught a fish, if you caught a fish, you might have only used forward-facing sonar for 10 minutes out of the period. But if you caught a fish
Right.
indicating that, I'm assuming it's affecting the entire period. So there is a little bit of room for error there. But
Okay.
I will say we kind of dug into the data, and because we can see how it's recorded.
Right.
Basically, was a fish. Each fish that's recorded is essentially assigned, was it directly caught using forward-facing sonar? And so I can look at a percentage of fish. And so roughly almost all 8 events were above 80% directly caught with forward-facing sonar during a forward-facing sonar period. And stop me at any time, Steve, if I'm
No,
getting
you're
too far into the weeds or.
you're doing good. So let's clarify that because somebody will grab that and say, "I'm sure Ryan just said 80% of fish were caught with forward-facing sonar." But what he actually said was that I'm going to use Gary Klein as an example because I travel with him a lot, and I know that some periods he'll declare forward-facing sonar and he'll never use it. But then other periods, whenever he declares forward-facing sonar, he'll catch like you said, 8 out of 10 fish or 10 out of 10 fish with it. And so what you're saying is that whenever an angler declares forward-facing sonar, you're going to count their entire catch that period as forward-facing sonar fish, which may or may not be the actual catch of that individual, but it's a if that technology is on, you're using it to narrow down an area or narrow down a bait category or whatever. So you're using it for that time. So you're declaring all those fish to be yes forward facing, which is probably a great way to do it because we do have a box to check for the official. So if Gary Klein has forward facing on, he declared period one to be his forward facing period. The official gets to check if the individual fish was caught with or without. And I write a definition in the rules for what that's going to be, but it's going to be at the discretion of the official. And that leaves a gray area. So you kind of buffed out those gray areas, but you said whenever you went back and looked that if an angler had forward facing declared for the period, 80% of the time they were catching their fish and the official was marking it as a forward facing anyways. So I get
Yeah,
it. Yep.
it definitely depended on the event. I would say
Okay.
there was one in particular that stood out. The Harris Chain of Lakes was the lowest by far, and for whatever reason on that event, during forward-facing sonar periods, only 30% of the fish were caught directly using forward-facing sonar. But if we look at any of the other events, I've got it in front of me. I think the lowest
Well, hey
percent.
Ryan, let's do it this way. Let's just start at the beginning, right? And go through the events. There's only 7 of them. That's not going to take too long. So, what did you learn from event 1 at Conroe?
Okay, so Lake Conroe, by far, really exciting because when you first gave me the data, there was only 3 or so tournaments that we had,
Right.
and I immediately pop it in, and I've gone through several different iterations of how we're kind of running the data,
Okay.
but it hasn't changed too much. So when I popped it out and I unpacked it, one of the first ones I looked at was Lake Conroe, which ended up having the largest disparity in catch rates of any of the events. So one of the
Interesting.
first ones I look at, I'm like, oh my God, like cut and dry, forward facing sonar, people are catching more fish.
Yeah.
And really interesting. So we saw the largest disparity. And based on the calculations from that second statistical test that I mentioned, where we're comparing anglers to themselves, the
Okay.
mean difference in catch rates on day 2 was about 1.7 or 1.8 fish per hour. So if you look at the entire
Mm.
tournament, or if you go to an average fishing day of 8 hours, you're
Right.
almost looking at 14 to 16 more fish that you would catch in a day based off that tournament data on Lake Conroe, which is very significant and important for tournament anglers to consider and important for fisheries managers to consider. But if
Yeah.
we also,
So hold on, Ryan. Let's take that number real quick. Let's just try to make it easy. If I have forward facing sonar on in period 3, you're saying that if I caught 2 fish in period 1 and 2 fish in period 2, my average would be 2 fish per period. But if I turn forward facing sonar on, I can multiply that by 1.7. So I catch almost two additional fish. So I
yeah,
catch 4 in period 3 based on Conroe data.
basically, yeah,
So
based off all of
basically that
the
makes
anglers.
an extra period.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's important for sure,
Yep.
especially on Lake Conroe. We found that it was important.
And that event was in January, February. And Conroe is very habitat limited, but you didn't assess time of year or habitat. You just went off of catch effort.
Yeah, and that's
Okay.
where we're going to kind of go down the road. We can maybe touch on that a little bit later, but
Okay.
because we only have 4 days of data, we can't really we can consider seasonality, but we can't
Mhm.
really look at the differences on these individual systems with seasonality because I don't have any
Gotcha.
data. I only have the data from the 4 days. I don't have events that are further along down the year, so I can
Okay.
consider that in a model a little bit later on once we're looking at this data, but I can't really consider it when we're looking at Lake Conroe standalone.
Okay. So Lake
Um,
Conroe, angler by angler, 1.7 multiplier when the forward facing sonar period was versus was not. What about whenever you look at that first test, that whole field test? Did the same stat hold true?
what do you mean by that?
Like whenever you run your first test, when you look at the entire field with or without forward facing sonar, did the entire field average 1.7, or is that just angler to angler?
I
Or
don't
am I
have that number
misinterpreting
because I
this?
wasn't looking at the mean
Okay.
difference between
Okay.
anglers, but I was looking at the overall catch rate difference, and it
Gotcha.
was substantial. I don't have the
Okay.
exact difference when we were looking at the
Okay.
entire field, but it was still the largest disparity that we saw when we're
Gotcha.
looking at catch rates.
All
But
right.
I
So
think
then, go ahead, Ryan.
but I think the other important thing that we learned from that when I first popped that data in um, was that a lot of people when they think of forward facing sonar, and even all last week I heard it when we would have these conversations, is that anglers are targeting bigger fish, and
Yeah.
they're able to catch bigger fish, and we didn't see that on Lake Conroe when we first summarized that data. We saw those big disparities in how many people were catching, but we
Hmm.
saw no statistical difference when we looked at either model or either statistical analysis that people were catching larger fish. So in general, what we kind of
Oh,
took
okay.
away from Lake Conroe was that people were catching significantly more fish, the largest out of any of the events, but they weren't necessarily catching bigger fish.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So then we go to Harris. Harris happened 2 weeks later, also in February. Harris chained the lake in Florida. What did we learn there?
So the Harris chain is where it kind of starts to get interesting again. Um,
Okay.
we saw significant differences in the catch rates on day one. So we saw significant increases in catch rates on day one. Not as large as
Yeah.
Lake Conroe, but we still did see that anglers using forward-facing sonar were catching more fish. But when we looked at the mean fish by weight, so were they catching larger fish? We saw
Mhm.
again the same thing. No significant difference in the size of fish caught, but we did see a little bit of a difference in catch rates, and that's kind of where this becomes interesting to me as a fisheries researcher. Is we saw these
Right.
huge increases in catch rates on Lake Conroe, but we didn't see the same increase on Harris Chain. And what we also saw on the Harris Chain of lakes was variability. On the first day, we had significant increases in catch rates, but the second day we
Mhm.
did not. And so that kind of signals to me that, okay, maybe we have some daily environmental variables that are leading into, is forward facing sonar more effective? So that's, we're going to look in this too down the road, but, was
Right.
there adverse weather on day two? Was it just, and people who watch the tour are going to know this, but I'm just kind of spitballing here.
Right.
But was there a lot of rain? Was it cloudy? Were
Mm.
there was it very windy, and so that bounced the boat up a lot, up and down a lot, and made it harder for people to use that forward-facing sonar? So, are there some daily
Yeah.
variables, or even is it fish characteristics, or what those fish are doing? Have they moved offshore or have they moved inshore? Things like that. So we can't necessarily account for some of that, but we can
Right.
account for things like daily weather, wind,
Mm.
um, different variables like that we can look into. So that's really interesting to me that we're seeing this variation, and what is driving that variation is one of the more important questions I think we need to answer.
All right. So let's see. Conroe 1.7 multiplier when a forward facing sonar is on, but a Harris chain. If I catch two fish a period, it's two fish a period with or without forward facing sonar. Basically, it's not significant
On day two, on day one, we
on day
did have
two.
a significant difference though, but I'm
Okay.
not. I'd have to look at the exact number to see what it is. And then
Bailey, your
also
angler. Well, I was gonna
also
say Bailey,
important
your
to point
angler
out.
gut may. Hold on, Ryan, just a second.
Yeah.
Your angler gut may tell you that if it's day two of competition, that everyone figured out a pattern day one that didn't involve forward facing sonar. Like they didn't feel like it was helping them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I can't recall that day two from live, like watching what could have been happening, but it could have been that. It could have been like Ryan was saying too, where environmental
Weather
factors
change.
could have made it pretty
Yep.
difficult too. Because like especially when you get up to smallmouth country, which is obviously very heavily, seemingly dominated by forward-facing sonar, wind throws a major wrench in all that. Where it's when you're in 4 or 5 footers, you're not really scoping to the means that you want to be. So there definitely could be that factor in there too. But I do remember that Harris Chain event also being dominated shallow grass wise,
Right.
with
Right.
like Wheeler, Bobby Lane, all those guys flipping versus using forward facing. So yeah, it could have been culmination.
Okay, Ryan. I'm gonna kind of lump Lake Murray and Lake Chickamauga in together. Although Murray happened in March and then Chickamauga happened all the way in May. But they're both, largemouth events. Could be offshore events. What did we see when you looked at those two events?
So Lake Murray again was our kind of standout. It was similar to Lake Conroe. We saw the
Okay.
second largest disparity in catch rates. So both days, day one and day two, we saw increases in catch rates, and we saw the largest increase in catch rates using forward-facing sonar outside of Lake Conroe.
Hmm.
But then when we looked at Chickamauga and Nickajack, we saw similar to what we saw on Harris Chain, where the first day, it's kind of vice versa actually. Day one on Chickamauga and Nickajack, we saw
Mhm.
no significant increase in catch rates using forward facing sonar. But day two, we did see significant increases using forward facing sonar.
Okay. That's. I mean, this is what makes biologists scratch their heads. Is we want a pattern.
Correct.
We want a pattern so bad that
Oh,
we either
we
want a
want
yes or no.
something that's we want something that's cut and dry. Yes,
Yeah.
this is the answer. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with fishery science and ecology in general, it's not always cut and dry.
And this is also, it frustrates me so bad because when people ask you a direct question, hey, is forward facing sonar causing anglers to catch more fish or allowing anglers to catch more fish, however you want to phrase that, you want to say yes or no. But as biologists, we always go, well, it really depends. And I hate that it depends answer, but you're just giving me more it depends results, and this is what I want to say it gets us in trouble, but it gets us in this circular conversation of, man, it depends on so many things. Because you got 4 fisheries across 4 months, some of the best anglers in the world catching largemouth. They're primarily catching largemouth, and maybe smallmouth are going to be a different conversation. We can get into that in just a second. But oh man, it depends becomes the answer.
Yeah, which is not a to your defense. I mean, it's not an answer I love to give because you want to be informative and you want to use these to manage the fishery to the best of your ability. But when you don't completely understand, or we use this thing, it depends. It's hard to make those cut and dry decisions that are beneficial for the fishery and also that all anglers can understand.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, let's move to Kentucky Lake. Kentucky Lake has rebounded greatly. We're going to have Adam Martin on the show at some point to talk about the work on Kentucky Lake, but it's rebounded greatly and has smallmouth, so you get both species. So first, what did you learn from Kentucky Lake, and then second, did we see a species different, or did you even look at that?
So I haven't even looked at species difference yet. That's kind of it's kind of one of the problems, not and it's a good problem to have with this data set, is there's so many rabbit holes that you can go down. You guys take down so much data for each individual fish. I think, once it's all said and done and I can add in some of these environmental data that we've been talking about, like wind speed, weather, a couple other things, I might have 15 to 20 different variables that can be assigned to each fish that's caught. And so we haven't started to look at species yet. That's definitely on the list, especially when you move up to some of the other systems. But Kentucky Lake, we saw no significant difference in catch rates the first day, but we did see a larger disparity in the increase in catch rate on the second day using forward-facing sonar. And it's funny that you mentioned Adam Martin because I'm intimately familiar with the fisheries that I manage. But one of the problems, again, looking at a data set like this is it's hard to pick up on every nook and cranny that could affect this data when you're not out on the water And I've never been to Kentucky Lake before. So it's kind of hard for me to investigate this to the best of my ability. And so one of the great things about the Black Bass Symposium last week was we had all these fisheries managers together. And so, especially with this project, I was trying my best to go out and find all the guys who worked on these fisheries and who were intimately familiar with them to kind of, glean some details off them. And then also in the future, when we're trying to, put some more data into this model and try and get some more information and better understanding, see if they have anything for me. And so the no significant increase in catch rates on day one was interesting, but the larger and more higher catch rates on day two was also interesting. And I talked to Adam Martin, and he actually has a creel survey that they've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years out on Kentucky Lake, and he was pretty surprised by the results that we saw from MLF because he's seen on average about 2 times the amount of fish caught using forward facing sonar than not
Right.
using forward facing sonar. But in general, he is interviewing a broad scope of anglers every day, from the average Joe who's out there with a bobber and a worm to the really diehard tournament angler, like Bailey that we have here. And
Right.
so I would expect to see in a creel survey like that a higher disparity in those catch rates just because of the broad scope of the anglers versus something like MLF, where we know these guys are great at catching fish without forward facing sonar.
Right.
So that's another loop to throw into this question and to throw into some of these results. But I think it is important that these guys are professionals and they're good at catching fish, whether or not they have forward facing sonar. And so we might not see as large disparities as we might see with average everyday anglers, which makes that large difference in catch rates on Lake Conroe and Lake Murray even more surprising as well.
And I'm just I'm in the background looking at each one of these events. Like you said, is a lot of data. Kentucky Lake alone, there's 2,231 fish catches logged over
Yeah.
4 days. But looking at them, I assumed watching it that smallmouth were going to play, a really big part, because smallmouth are a big part of the recovery story of Kentucky Lake. And if you get a big bag right now, 5-fish bag, it is dominated by smallmouth. And they have an average weight whenever we weigh across the board. The smallmouth had an average weight of 2.6, and the largemouth had an average weight of 2.3. So smallmouth were slightly more advantageous just on an individual basis. But whenever I look at the totals, we had 1,800 largemouth caught and just shy of 400 smallmouth. So that tells you right away you've got a little bit of a 4-to-1 ratio of largemouth. So it playing like the other largemouth lakes on the forward facing results maybe makes sense because of just the type of fishing the guys were doing.
Yeah. 100%. And
Okay.
as we'll see later on, when we talk
Yeah.
about some of these other fisheries, the type of fishing that you do, depending on the patterns that these fisheries are in, it might be more advantageous to go without the live scope and target, maybe these larger fish are in a different area, and I'm hitting on this pattern to get me the most fish and the most weight. Whereas, the live scope, for whatever reason, depending on the day conditions, depending on the pattern that the fish are in, might not be advantageous to winning the tournament that day.
Okay. Well, we've got 2 more events left. We've got the Potomac that you know a lot about, right? And we can dive into that in detail. And then we also have Saginaw Bay, which I haven't seen the results for yet. I've seen the tournament results, and I've seen our score tracker, but I haven't seen your analysis results. And Potomac River was dominated by largemouth. I think we all expected that to be the case. But it was the second highest catch rate, 2,900 fish caught over 4 days. The guys just smashed them. So what did we learn from the Potomac?
What we kind of learned from the Potomac, and like I said, that's one of the fisheries that I manage, so I'm pretty familiar with it. And I from my knowledge of forward-facing sonar, these were kind of the results that I had expected. And so what we saw was no significant difference, no significant increase in catch rates on either day, which makes a lot of sense for me. Knowing the fishery, it's incredibly shallow. The average depth of the Potomac is about 20 feet, but in general, these guys can be catching fish in inches of water. And that's really kind of what we saw. Ott Defo won that event, and he won it, without forward-facing sonar and catching fish with, damn near their backs out of the water, where it wouldn't have been as effective. So that's another one that we can point to, obviously he was successful. He won the tournament, and the strategy to win that tournament was to find those bigger fish that were in those shallow creeks where forward-facing sonar wouldn't be as effective. But I think what's really important to glean off of this data, Stephen, is, we haven't talked too much about it in this conversation. We've really focused on the catch rates. But on the Potomac River, the first day we saw no significant difference in the size of fish caught on the first
Yes,
day.
sir.
But on day 2, we actually saw an increase in size of fish caught when not using forward-facing sonar. And so across the entire fisheries, across the entire tournament trail, day 2 on the Potomac River is the only day that we saw an increase in fish size caught when not using forward-facing sonar. On every single other event, we saw either no significant differences, or we saw in one day we had an increase in size of fish caught using forward-facing sonar. But this was the only event and only day where we saw an increase in fish size caught when not using forward-facing sonar.
And for everybody who's listening and not watching, both Bailey and I had the exact same shocked look on our faces just now, because I don't know how we both didn't pick up on that last week whenever you did your presentation. Maybe you didn't mention it, but when
I
you
did
just
not.
said, yeah, when you just said if the forward-facing sonar is off, you catch bigger fish, we were both like, "What?"
And I think
That's really cool.
that really has to do with just how these pros were attacking the fishery. Again, pointing out Defo, he was back in those creeks and he was catching 2 to 3 pounders, and he was catching a lot of them without the forward-facing sonar because he didn't need it. He was
Right?
flipping a jig back in there. And
Yeah.
so in certain situations like that, it may be more advantageous to turn off the scope rather than looking for those fish. But
Love
that
it.
is certainly an outlier in this data. Not necessarily an outlier. I shouldn't use that word, but that is a very unique case. In
Gotcha.
no other day did we see an increase. And I think that really has to do with it being a tidal system, a really shallow system, and the time of year that they were there.
Yeah, yeah, this is great. And I mean, I wish I had 15 years of this data to give you. But it's fun starting year one and going through it, because I think that you've already pointed out, like, we all, especially after that Conroe event, you kind of go, "Yep, that's exactly what I thought would happen." These anglers are catching more fish with forward-facing sonar, and then as you've kind of worked through this data set, you're punching a lot of little holes in that argument, and then saying it doesn't change the fish size. And once it did allow them to catch slightly bigger fish, but then also I have an example when it was actually detrimental to the size of the fish. This is amazing. Is there anything else that we learned from Potomac that we need to cover before we kind of finish off with Saginaw Bay?
No, I mean, I think the Potomac was really interesting, but those were my 2 takeaways from it, which are
Okay,
pretty cool.
that's very cool. Okay, Saginaw Bay. Like I said, I I haven't seen your analysis. We didn't have, Saginaw Bay happened as we were all traveling to Black Bass 2025. Um, Championship Day was on Sunday, the same day that kind of we had our first meet and greet. So I sent you the data like Thursday afternoon, and I can't believe we're sitting here 4 days later and you already have the results back. So let's hear Saginaw Bay being, once again, what I thought would be a smallmouth event, but looking at the data, it looks like it was another largemouth
Was it
slugfest.
the most fish caught event of the year?
Saginaw Bay was the most fish caught with 3,376 over 4 days. And just for stats, people, That's 8,327 pounds in 4 days.
That's
Wow.
crazy.
Yeah, I before this is over, I will pull up our all time stats and give you the updated number. But go ahead, Ryan. You tell me what we learned from forward facing sonar.
So we saw kind of a similar story to the Potomac, but we saw no significant difference in catch rates on either day, which is very interesting. And then again, looking at the weights, we saw two significant differences on the weights on both days, and they were increases in fish size. So no significant difference in the amount of fish caught, but we did see that forward facing sonar was increasing the size of fish caught. Although it should be said that it wasn't a huge amount. It wasn't like they were averaging a pound bigger. It was a smaller difference, but it was a significant increase in size on both days of fish caught.
Amazing. So it kind of holds in line. In science, we try, just like you said, like you're going to compare angler by angler, and you're also going to change, field use versus non-use, and compare those things. You're trying to smooth out all the variables so you can just get to these averages. So did you do this? Did you take the entire season and kind of smooth it out and just say season wide across all 7 events? Did forward facing sonar increase catch rate and did it change size class? Did you do that?
I have not done that yet. I mean, that is a really interesting question. But yeah, I did not look at it. I did not look at it that way yet, and that's probably just me immediately just jumping to want to break it down fishery by fishery. But that's certainly something that we can look at and take a peek at. But for me, it's more understandable or easier to process
Mhm.
when I can split it up into those fisheries, and it doesn't for avid tournament watchers and tournament anglers, that's probably a very intuitive way to look at it. Is it affecting catch rates over the course of the season? But for me, as a fisheries biologist, uh, looking at that by fishery is really how I looked at it and was interested in it. But that's certainly
Great.
something we can do down the road just to see if it was having an overall effect on it. And I would be interested, giving the results that we saw. Did Lake Conroe and Lake Murray and some of those ones where we did see the disparity, did those outweigh some of the other ones where we didn't see a difference throughout the course of the entire season?
Hmm. Yep. Yep. Man, to me, this is cool because I told Bailey last episode that, watching your presentation was one of my favorite ones. I get to take this data set that this goes back to 2017 for me. In 2017, I'm sitting on my couch watching a cup, texting with Gary Klein, going, dude, the data y'all are collecting is a lot like our fisheries data. And he's like, you have no idea, and sends me a data sheet. And I'm like, oh, I had no idea. They were actually collecting depth ranges in 5 foot increments. They were collecting lure type. They were collecting habitat type, a GPS location. And I'm like, Gary, you got to give me that. You got to give me that so that I can provide it to agencies.
Yeah,
And and since 2017, we went and backlogged all the way to the first event at Amistad, the first cup. And I've done every cup. We've had some one-off high school and college events, the BPT. Uh, we have heavy hitters. We have Red Crest. We have all these events. 117 of them, I believe. Yeah, we're at 117 right now in our data set. And across 117 events, we've tracked 137,367 fish catches. And I mean,
that's
it's
crazy.
it's unbelievable, but it's almost too much data, right, Ryan? Like you look at it and you're like, this is a daunting task. How am I going to divide it up?
Yeah, no, it was very daunting for me. And we're still thinking about some of the methods and some of the things that we want to incorporate. We're still thinking about adding some of the additional data, like the weather and the wind and the stuff. I mentioned
Mm.
earlier. But I've always, Stephen, thought of fisheries management as kind of a Venn diagram where
Yep.
we have the scientists and you have the anglers, and we're going to have some knowledge that the anglers don't have, but the anglers certainly have an incredible amount of knowledge that we don't have. And
That's
this
so
data
true.
set is something that we don't have access to typically. And it
Mhm.
really kind of finds us in the middle of that Venn diagram of those two circles. It's just an incredible asset as a fisheries manager to have this for your resource. I was excited to have this just the Potomac data, but to be able to look at this as an entire picture and really start to pick it apart as we move forward. I think the next step for us is we have all this data and we're seeing this variability from tournament to tournament and even from day to day in these tournaments. And how do we make sense of all that? And so the
Right.
next step for us really here is to start building a model where we can kind of explain some of this variation and really pick apart some of those variables that make forward-facing sonar conducive to increased catch rates, or pick apart some of the things that we see that in the Potomac River on day 2, for instance, were detrimental to catching larger fish. It
Mm.
wasn't a
Yep.
huge difference, but and one of those things that I mentioned in my presentation last week was depth, and obviously depth has a huge role in forward-facing sonar, and because of this data set, because you guys are recording that, we really have the option to dig into these variables and describe, when is this effective and what's conducive to increasing catch rates for that. And I think that's an incredible question to ask. And if we can find an answer to that, I think that will benefit fisheries managers across the country. If they can say, maybe not using it as entirely as a justification for management actions, but if
Right.
they're concerned about a fishery that's not trending in the right direction, they can point to information like this and say, well, maybe we should be concerned about forward-facing sonar and how it's affecting our fishery.
Mm.
Or in my case, look at the Potomac River. I'm really not concerned about forward-facing sonar having a large effect on the Potomac River.
Right. When we're talking about bass populations, I don't want to pigeonhole
Correct.
you into all
Yes,
species. Yep.
correct.
Okay. Yeah. No, Ryan, I think we're right in line with you. And just so you know, we've announced the 2026 schedule, and we will be keeping the exact same rules format. We are going to go down to 50 anglers competing on day 1 and 2, but you're going to have a similar data set headed your way for every event next year. We don't have any replicate locations, so you're not going to be able to compare the same place year in and year out. But I think there's some opportunities that live in next year's schedule. I circle stage 2 at Lake Hartwell in February as a true spotted bass event. And, we might be able to learn something about maybe a niche species and how forward facing sonar helps those anglers. I look at, Grand Lake in June, Grand Lake in Oklahoma in June, a true largemouth event with some smallmouth, but they're a small portion of the population. But a grinders event that could be one offshore, in June. Like I see the schedule, and in my mind, I take all my assumptions that I have with forward facing sonar, and I start looking at the schedule and saying, this is the event. This is the event. They're gonna smash them on these days, and we'll find out. And what'll be cool is, do you think you're gonna try to develop a model to predict these things, or do you think we're gonna keep layering in this data until we can get enough information that you have a better predictive model?
I think what we're gonna do is just try to describe what's happening, what's having an
Gotcha.
effect on catch rate.
Mm,
So we can't really predict because we would have to have that data to feed into it. I mean, we
gotcha.
could gather some data to predict, but we'll probably end up building a model that's describing what's having the largest effect on the catch rates and on the fish size. And the really cool thing about this, having a statistical model for this, Stephen, is that as we go on and as you guys keep collecting this data, how I and how most fishery managers, analyze their data is through mostly R code. A lot of people use different stuff, but R is a statistical program. And
Okay.
now that I have your format for how you guys collect data, All I have to do, and you saw it when you sent me over the Saginaw Bay data on Monday and I had it ready for today, all I have to do is format that data and plug it in. And I just click a
Right.
button. And once we have that model, we can run it. So this information can just build and build and build.
I love it.
And it can fine tune itself to where we have, a really good understanding of these fisheries and what's maybe driving these catch rates and fish sizes with this data set, which is just priceless for a fisheries manager like myself.
You're absolutely correct. And I look forward to whenever you start layering in habitat or you layer in, I don't know if we're going to do lure type, but habitat, time of year, weather condition, we can get those things because we do understand date, time, location. Like you can pull those from a weather app and start
Yep.
layering those in. And then that depth, Ryan, I took a picture of your depth graph because how it was visualized, each individual fish based on depth with and without forward facing sonar. I looked at it immediately. I was like, I've never seen our data in that way.
Yeah.
And inherently, it was impressive and drew me into where I wanted to have more of a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was one of my favorite things I saw, because one of my favorite things to do is to take data like this and just
Mm-hmm.
explore it and just visualize it in different ways. And that's really how you can gain a better understanding of what analysis you want to do or what you want to do with this data. But exploring it visually and just picking it apart by its different values. But to make that, there was no statistical analysis with that graph that I put
Right.
up there. I just simply plotted the depth at which fish were caught and whether they were caught using forward-facing sonar or not using forward-facing sonar. And
Mm-hmm.
if you think about it, Steve, there's only one forward-facing sonar period. And so the
Mm-hmm.
contrast in those depths is actually much greater because you have twice the amount of fishing effort
Right.
using not forward facing sonar versus forward facing sonar. But unfortunately, there's no way for me to calculate a catch per unit effort on the depth of water they're fishing in because I don't know how long they spent in that. I just know that fish was caught then.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
because I don't have the unit of effort that they spent in that depth of water, I can't calculate the catch rate, but I can visualize it. But it is a more stark contrast than what that graph illustrated because they spent twice the amount of time not using forward facing sonar.
Yeah. And for our audience who's maybe listening to this going, yeah, guys, but this is only the BPT. This is affecting 60 anglers. I have news for you. And check your press releases because by the time this is out, the information's out. But the Tackle Warehouse Invitationals is now the Tackle Warehouse Pro Circuit again, and they're going to the exact same format of 3 hours a day. So you're going to get a third of their effort on the Pro Circuit with 125 guys next year is going to allow forward-facing sonar, and the other 2/3 is not. And I would venture to guess, not saying I've been in any meetings and have proprietary information, but I'd venture to guess that's going to happen on the BFLs. That's going to happen on the Toyota Series. That's going to happen in college, and it's probably not going to happen in high school. But I would imagine it's even going to be more restrictive in high school.
Well, isn't the high school, even for MLF side, isn't it no forward facing in the event?
Exactly. No
Yeah.
forward facing at all. Yep. Yep. So, I think that if you're listening to this at home and maybe you're a BFL angler, or maybe you're thinking about throwing your hat in to be a BFL angler, you're going to sign up for one. I would say in 2026 or 2027, look for a rules change to only allow forward facing sonar for a third of the day. And MLF is trying to build technology to make sure that's enforceable. And it's coming, and it's coming quick. But what Ryan's talking about, maybe, I'll ask Bailey, does this make you feel like you are a forward facing guy? Does it make you feel like the rest of the field can catch you because of the data you're seeing, or does it make you feel a little better because you're like, well, in some events, forward facing is going to help me and is going to propel me ahead of my competition? How does it make you feel?
I personally love the format when we saw all three leagues make a change the same
Mm-hmm.
year. We said it on the podcast. I thought the Major League Fishing BPT change was my favorite in regards to we're going to see some of the best anglers in the world be doing both things, technology or
Yeah.
not, in the same day. We're
Yep.
going to see how they adjust with it and without it. And I think being forced to do it with it and without it creates some of the best anglers. Those best anglers with and the best anglers without it will rise to the top as they usually do. Um, just like me personally, love using it just as much as I love leaving it at home. And
Gotcha.
so
Yep.
I think the more data, the more things we can do with it. I mean, this isn't getting into the conversation of if we think it should be banned or not. This is more of I think the more we learn more about it and how it's impacting the fishing and how we can, I guess, critique it and evaluate it going forward
Hmm.
more at a deeper level, I think is like what you're doing here, Ryan. I think is more beneficial for the future of fishing, and also making sure that if we are to come to make a decision of get rid of it or not, that we are doing our due diligence in getting the data to support such a decision, versus just
Yeah.
making it off of emotion. So I think, I mean, something like this, technology or not, I think if you're making your decision to compete based off if a tech is allowed or not, then you're probably not competing for the right reasons. But I think, 'cause I think if you're going to compete, you're going to compete one way or another. So to your question, if it scares me or not, I don't. It doesn't bother me which way forward. And I honestly feel better. Not. I mean, it's funny you say a forward facing guy. I feel like I'm better without it than I am with it. I feel like I
Well,
can
you
get left.
might be, yeah, you might be better without it. I mean, you've got wins under your belt, and you got wins both previous before forward facing existed, and now that it does exist. But I think that's what you are painted with a pretty broad brush because of your age. You can adapt to forward facing sonar faster than older guys like me. I mean, you're going to learn it quicker. It's just what it is.
There's some to that. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
growing up in a techie age. But
In the techie age, that's right. And this is, Ryan, you may be aware of some of these studies, but early on in the forward facing discussions, most of the research was coming out of, species that are vulnerable to harvest, like crappie or catfish. And a lot of the social science side of it was just interviewing anglers. Like you said, Adam was doing a krill survey. Interview anglers and say, did you use forward facing sonar? Yes or no? And then quantify how many fish catches they had and their effort. And you're doing that in a different way with this Major League Fishing thing. But one of the things that always struck me is during those interviews, often anglers with forward facing sonar would report that they felt like they were catching more fish per hour. And the anglers without forward facing sonar would often report that they felt like the forward facing sonar are catching more fish per hour. And, uh, and then your data kind of says, well, sometimes that is true, but it's not
Yeah,
always true.
yeah, 100%. We did a survey in Maryland. We sent it out to our general public, and we kind of got the same thought process. Everybody thought it was a competitive advantage. Everybody
Right.
thought it was increasing catch rates and things like that. But especially when it comes to the Potomac data, it's not always the case, and
Right.
perception is strong sometimes.
Now I'm gonna turn it over to Bailey for any other forward facing sonar questions before I completely end the conversation on forward facing sonar because I want to talk about you and I want to talk about Potomac. But I'll give Bailey the microphone for just a few minutes. If you got any more questions, Bailey.
yeah, I'm more just curious. So going into your next year studies on stuff like this, like what other variables do you want or do you feel are most important to add to this study, say going into next year to build upon, what you guys have already been looking at?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a question that I'm still asking, and that's one of the main reasons that I talked to Adam Martin and some other people at the symposium last week. But we're definitely looking at daily conditions. So I can, like Steven mentioned, I can grab from weather data, I can grab average wind speed, I can grab temperature, I can grab general weather. So was it cloudy, sunny, precipitation, things like that. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to capture this yet, but I do think looking at things that are unique to like forage base, I think is interesting. I'm not sure how I can successfully incorporate that, but we do know where a lot of the times anecdotally that forward facing sonar is really important is these offshore shad fisheries,
Mhm.
where typically these fish were not available to be caught because you'd have to drive around all day. You can't see the shad balls. But now with the forward facing sonar, you can drive around, you can identify the shad balls and the fish. And so I'm not sure how we're going to incorporate that or if I can successfully incorporate it. But I think those more offshore fisheries and kind of dialing in, can we incorporate forage or some aspect of that, because obviously we don't really have that in the Potomac. And so incorporating some of the more environmental or lake specific or fishery specific variables, I think is important. But it's going to require some brainstorming among myself and some other colleagues on how we can incorporate that successfully. Because there's a lot of lakes out there that have, threadfin and gizzard shad, but they might not have that offshore that fishery that is really successful with the forward facing sonar. So we're looking
Yeah.
into a bunch of different stuff like that, but I'm still asking myself the same question. So if there's any managers out there that saw their tournament or their fishery on the list last year or this upcoming year, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to chat and connect and see what we can incorporate into these models as we're going forward.
Yeah, I love that, and I think Steve would be cool, and this is just me being the angler and thinking about this, in regards to use case, like he's talking about with, whether it's being used offshore on shad or if it's being used shallow grass, wood, things like that. Because just when we think that there's a limit to use cases on forward-facing sonar, we are always proven wrong. But that could
Mhm.
potentially be a category for, say, the marshals. At the end of the day, like what has been the majority use case of that angler's forward-facing sonar use of that period was, is it chasing bait? Is it, using it on grass lines, things like that? I mean, guys are even flipping grass now
Right.
with forward facing sonar,
With
being
it.
able to see the fish in the grass. That's one thing I've learned this
Mhm.
past year. And so I think there's different things you almost wonder if you could categorize that, because there's not a laundry list, I guess, of popular ways that forward facing sonar is used. I wonder if that could be something that could be added to the iPad deal that the marshals have.
Yeah, let's I'm going to give you let's chat offline about that cuz
Yeah.
I don't want
This is
you saying
again
something on this podcast and then me getting an email like, "Why didn't you do that?"
yeah, well, this is me being in the crowd throwing work at
I love
somebody that has nothing to do with me, so I apologize. But speaking out loud,
No, I get an opportunity every year whenever we update Score Tracker. I get opportunities to kind of put my 2 cents in. It 3 years ago, I asked for the forward-facing sonar questions. We've been tracking forward-facing sonar use. Yes or no? Was the fish caught with forward-facing sonar for 3 years? This year we had the unique addition of it only being allowed for one period, which allows Ryan to do his work. We're actually going to look at if a fish, if an angler even had it on versus when they didn't. So it forces that same angler to compete under those same conditions on that same water body in the same day. The data we have from the 2 previous years, there's some gray area, right? Because was it on? Was it not on? Were they even trying? So you can't say that a fish was caught without forward facing sonar because you don't know if the forward facing sonar was on. You know when a fish was caught with it because it's marked, but you can't. What is without? That's difficult to quantify. But that was a question that 3 years ago I wanted in the data set. I had originally thought that agencies would be doing a lot of research into exploitation, especially when we talk about size. Ryan brought up size, and therefore Major League Fishing could lead with some of that data. Ryan's the first person to take it in this direction, and I think this is a better idea than I had with it. So I applaud you, Ryan, for having the forethought And I'm just grateful you came to me with a great idea and have taken the ball and ran with it.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm surprised that somebody didn't beat me to the punch, but it's an incredible data set, and it speaks volumes about MLF and their partnership with people like myself, to accomplish some of the goals that we have in fisheries research. Because there's not another data set out there like this. It's really
Right.
cool, and it's you can go down so many different rabbit holes, and one of the fun thoughts that I've had with it is. Are anglers changing their behavior when they're using forward-facing sonar? So we can look at the habitats and the bait categories and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So there's so many different questions that you can answer with this, which is really cool and really important for improving our fisheries throughout the country.
Yep. Love it. Bailey, you got another one for Ryan on forward facing sonar?
No, no, I really don't. And
Good.
this is it's not a question. It's more of a call out, and because I know we mentioned it in a previous episode, Steve, but I love reinforcing this and drilling this at home because I hopefully more people can take this approach into conversations like this. Is it's important while we have folks like Ryan and Steve out here putting data behind a argument while people on social media might throw emotion out left and right. I love these conversations that are constructive. None of
Mm-hmm.
us could agree on a single thing, but I love that we can be constructive, talk about things like on a level headedness. That's why I appreciated the Black Bass Symposium where I could have a table of 12 people that maybe none of us agreed with each other on one thing. And I'm not saying that's the case, but you could have had that and we're able to have a constructive, civilized conversation. So it's the more you can have these conversations at a mature level, especially one that is touchy as forward facing sonar is, the more we are better equipped to make a good decision going forward for the future of fishing.
Well said, Bailey. And Ryan, were you able to stay for Friday's summit?
I was there or you mean Thursday Summit?
Yeah, whatever day it was. Thursday summit. Yes, sir.
I started losing track of days at the end of the week too. I was able to partake in the entire morning and most of the afternoon, but I had to boogie after that.
Gotcha. So which questions did you tackle?
I was in number 3 and number 7. Number 3 was anglers in general having an effect on the fishery, and number
Right.
7 was technology.
All right. Do you mind giving us some insight into one or both of those questions and what kind of your thoughts were and what your group came up with?
Yeah, we can. I mean, it's relevant, so we should talk about the second one, which was the technology, and it was, I forget the exact phrasing of the question, but it was, what can we do as technology improves, and how can we protect our fisheries? Is that along the lines of what it was? You guys there?
All right, we're gonna start that one over if it's okay with
Okay.
you, Ryan. You kind of froze up for a second, so just lead off again with talking about that technology question.
Yeah, so I think I was in the number 7 group. I think it's probably the one that's most relevant to the conversation that we're having now. But it was essentially, and Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the question was essentially, as technology increases um, in the future, what can we do to uh, best protect and best manage our fisheries?
Correct.
More or
Yeah,
less.
I wasn't involved in that question, but Bailey was as well. So Bailey, does that sound like the right question?
Yeah, talking about future of technology and its impact on fisheries, and then the second part, which I don't even know if any of the groups got to, but was should there be an asterisk on new records utilizing technology? Which I
Yeah,
don't, I
we
don't think a
definitely
single
didn't.
group even got to that.
Yeah, we definitely didn't. We didn't touch on that at all. But as you can imagine, with with it being the Black Bass Symposium and the word technology and improving technology, a major talking point of the conversation was forward-facing sonar.
Right.
And we had a lot of scientists at the table. We had a couple tournament anglers at the table, and we focused really heavily on, you know, honestly, I didn't put into the conversation too much, but we focused really heavily on the effects of forward-facing sonar. And there was a lot of people at the table who were, very persistent about the fact that it was having effects. And one of the cool
Mm.
things was I could point to some of the research that I was doing with MLF and
Right.
kind of say, well, it could be a case by case basis, and kind of what we came up with, and could be equally as touchy as forward facing sonar is, you know, um, forward facing sonar is not under the excise tax for or electronics in general
Right.
are not under the excise tax that is essentially added on to all fishing equipment and then gets dispersed throughout fisheries management agencies to help support research, and electronics are not under there. And so we kind
Mhm.
of brought up the question, well, one of the hottest topics in freshwater fisheries management right now is forward facing sonar. Yet all of this technology is not providing any funds for the research on it. And
Right.
so
That's
that
true.
was, yeah, that was one of the, what we kind of came up with as a group, is there something we can do to open that conversation up, and see if that's something that's available. And obviously, there's a laundry list of electronics from offshore to inshore to forward-facing sonar. But I do think, as a fisheries manager, and as someone whose salary does and research funds do come in part from federal excise taxes. This is a big part of what I've been working on, not only with MLF but through a couple other projects I've been doing with the state. And I would like to see a little bit of those funds, into the excise tax. So that is a touchy subject as well, I'm sure, with some of with Garmin, Humminbird, and all of them. But that's one of the conversations that we had at the table.
I think that's probably the part of the subject that is missed is
Yeah.
as an angler, you contribute to your agency through the gear you purchase. But the purchase of electronics, um, and I can give you the history of it. We can avoid that if we would prefer, but it was lobbied by several of the manufacturers. One specifically led the effort to say that your electronics were actually navigational units on your boat and that they didn't aid you in the capture of fish. And now with forward facing sonar, it's much more difficult to make that argument. Now, what has to happen to change this is someone has to put a proposal in front of U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And currently, there is no U.S. Fish and Wildlife director. Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, that will be untrue. They have been nominated. So, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife director is an appointed position appointed by the president. They're appointed by the president, then they're voted on and affirmed by Congress. So, we're waiting on the affirmation of our director. Once that director is in place, then that director will, part of his or her purview is to collect and distribute the funds, the sportfish restoration dollars appropriated by the Dingell-Johnson Act from those excise taxes. And this is a place where those that want to have a discussion about forward facing sonar's impact on fisheries, I can promise you one impact is it's not contributing to our restoration dollars.
Yeah.
I had no idea that wasn't included in that. And I think if you tell a lot of
Right.
anglers, they'll probably be pretty pissed because there's a lot of
Yeah.
money being spent on
Well,
electronics.
Oh
And
yeah.
here's the sad part. The sad part is just like every other piece of tackle you purchase, it's not the manufacturer that's going to end up paying that tax. It is the anglers. Your unit will go up by 10% so that you can pay that tax for the purchase of that unit. The truth of it is, Bailey, you would agree with this. If your unit costs 10% more because it's going to make your fisheries better, you would pay 10% more.
happily. I know obviously I'm
Happily.
not speaking for everybody in this
Exactly.
group
We're
because
not
there's
either.
certainly some that don't, but
But let's also say to those anglers who choose not to purchase forward facing sonar, um, those anglers would want the anglers that choose to purchase it to pay 10% to improve our fisheries because they feel like that technology is allowing them to capture fish at a faster rate or whatever it may be. And Ryan can prove or disprove that, and so can any other biologist based on data they're collecting. But at the end of the day, the one fact we do have is they're not contributing.
yeah, that needs to
Yeah.
change in my opinion.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was a pretty important
and
conversation.
I I luckily got to hear that conversation, and I already have I have a long list, as you would imagine, for my first trip to Washington to sit down with the new director. I have a long list of things, and the excise tax for forward-facing sonar is already on that list.
We're gonna
So,
slap a mic on you for that conversation.
yeah, the last director I did not get to meet with, but this one I have a personal connection to. So
Awesome.
we're going to have the conversation, and it needs to happen. So that was good. So that part of y'all's discussion, Ryan, on that technology came to excise tax. Bailey, did yours? You were in a different group that covered that same topic. Did y'all's
Correct.
come to the same conclusion, or did it even come up?
That part never even came up.
Okay.
I'm glad we brought that up in here because I would say the vast majority of anglers that are going to go out and buy this technology would be very in support of it being added to that. And I honestly think that in bringing this up, I'm actually fairly combining very and fairly in the same word. Uh, Kind of disappointed in the technology companies in general. All three have had massive opportunities throughout the inception of forward-facing sonar to put more into conservation beyond just throwing a couple dollars here and there, but actually put in efforts towards conservation. Put not just money, but boots in the ground to do things
Mm-hmm.
for the anglers. They've had huge opportunities to jump at this, and no one has led the way yet. And I think that's
Yeah,
been a
I
big bummer too, just from
you know
I guess outside looking in.
with Major League Fishing, we get to work with Minn Kota, which is a Johnson Outdoors brand, also
Right.
Umbrella Hummingbird, and they contribute to our habitat restoration efforts and are putting in a lot of habitat across the country. And I've had some of these personal conversations with their leadership and marketing team, and they're in line. They completely understand it, and but they're playing by the rules of the game that they have right now. And I think that as soon as this is brought up, it will all change. There's another big one if we're just going to talk excise tax and make this a super boring episode. If you purchase tackle online from like Amazon, that stuff is not excise taxed.
Hmm.
So the stuff that's coming in from China or sold through Amazon, there's no because excise tax is voluntary. Tackle Warehouse, somebody like that, Bass Pro Shops, they are keeping up with who buys what, and they're supplying that. Um, Vendors like Pure Fishing, they are voluntarily saying, "Here's how much tackle we sold," and they're doing it. But as Amazon Marketplace is not, and so we have a modernizing the excise tax regulation that is being debated through Congress right now to address that part already on the online tackle sales. And I think that what we're going to see really quickly is we'll see a bump in the contribution to each of our state agencies because of that.
I hope so.
It'll happen. All right, Ryan. Let's get off of taxes. That's man, we hit forward
Yeah,
facing sonar and taxes so far.
yeah.
We're if we have an audience left, I'm surprised.
Two very polarizing topics.
But let's be polarizing more. Tell us the issues at the Potomac River. What are things that are keeping you up at night on the Potomac and the challenges you have?
So we're kind of unlike most fisheries in the southeast. Obviously, it's a tidal river. Now we do have a lot of tidal rivers
Wait,
throughout.
time out. Did you just consider Maryland to be the southeast?
Well, we are in the south. We are in the southern division of the American Fisheries Society, but
Okay,
we
keep
we
going.
are formally. I will
I
say,
can see the comments now.
formally, I will say Maryland is the Mid Atlantic.
Okay.
That's where I lump us. But most bass fishing takes place in the southeast. So to
Right.
compare it to that and some of the issues or the generalizations of Southeast fisheries, you guys have touched on it a lot on your podcast, and we've talked about it a lot at the Black Bass Symposium. That sometimes, we need harvest of smaller fish because there's not
Okay.
enough
Yep.
food out there for some of these fish to grow them to larger sizes. In a tidal system, that's not really the case. We have an
Okay.
abundance of forage out there. We have our year-round forage base, whether it's some of our minnows, our crawfish, things like that. We have seasonal
Hmm.
forage that comes in. We have blueback, and alewife herring, and hickory shad that are anadromous fish that come up and spawn and provide seasonal forage opportunities. We sat in on one talk. I don't know if either of you sat in on it about feed preference for growth rates on largemouth bass. And one of the top two forages were koi. Well, we have an abundance of invasive goldfish in the
Right.
Potomac River and the Upper Bay. So there's no shortage of forage. And so our bottlenecks on the Potomac River have to do with habitat and reproduction, which unfortunately are really hard things to control in a large tidal system. And so we monitor that really closely. We have habitat surveys. I have my annual monitoring survey that I go out on, and we keep track of the habitat that we're finding fish in and the quality, whether it's improving or declining at certain of our sites. But those are really the things that concern me, is the habitat and the reproduction. Because if we can produce fish, if we can have fish recruit to the fishery, we can grow them to those good sizes. And we're never going to be like a Texas where we're getting a bunch of 10+ pounders, but we can grow fish to really great quality fisheries, as we saw at the MLF tournament this year, where we set the second highest catch rate, and a lot of those fish were 2 to 3 pounds. And I one of my colleagues and good friends, Jeremy Risley, was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about what he liked to do was just go out and catch a bunch of 3-pounders. And we have opportunities like that in the Potomac River and the Upper Bay, but we really have to keep an eye on our habitat and our reproduction, and we have to really focus on reducing some of the fish mortality where and when we can. Those are, in a tidal fishery that's as large as the Potomac and is complicated. There's 4 different agencies that have management authority on the Potomac River. You have myself with Maryland DNR, you have Virginia, you have Potomac River Fisheries Commission, and then you also have DC. And so it's a lot of moving pieces, and it's hard to manage some of these things, but we do our best in keeping an eye on it and working with our partners to identify solutions if we can notice declining trends. But habitat and reproduction are the main things that keep me up at night.
I like so much of that. Number one, people often try to paint with this broad brush. And whenever I say something along the lines of like most reservoirs in the United States, then they apply reservoirs to their system. And if it's a natural system or tidal system or river system, the reservoir equation maybe doesn't work. You also apply, hey, we need more harvest, and harvest isn't going to hurt the Potomac. That's not what I just heard you say. But what I did hear you say is that's not the bottleneck. The bottleneck comes down to habitat and reproduction or recruitment. When it comes to habitat, is there something that y'all are doing? I hear collaboration with 4 different agencies. Is there something y'all are doing to try to address habitat, or is that something you have to kind of throw up your hands and say there's nothing we can do here?
There's a little bit of both. The things that you can do are more broad scale and harder to tackle. I worked with Arkansas for a couple of years. You guys got me?
We got you now.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it again. Just start with, of course, the question was, um, is habitat something you can address, or is it something that you just have to deal with?
Yeah, and it's something that we can address, but it's not like some of the reservoir habitat projects that you see across the country, where you can get boots on the ground and you can cut down trees and get those in the water, or something like the Arkansas cube to disperse grass. Um, they're more broad scale, so it's really keeping an eye on development in our watersheds and making sure that that development that's happening, um, we're really mitigating the effects. And we've had some problems doing that. A couple of our tidal fisheries more north on the Chesapeake Bay, we've seen some sedimentation from increasing development, and we've seen some really tough results on our vegetation, and because of that, our fishery. And so we really keep a close eye on some of the development and working with our partner agencies, Maryland Department of the Environment, and working with them to, we don't ever want to choke out growth in the economy and development and progress, but we want to make sure that it's done sustainably and that it's done responsibly, so that we're not dumping a bunch of sediment in there, or we're not increasing the amount of nutrients. And that's really, really hard, especially when you look at the Potomac River watershed, which is one of the most densely populated on the East Coast. You've got DC right there. You got a bunch of other, urban situations, urban environments, and so it's really hard to balance, and it's really requires a broad effort with a lot of partners. But the main answer is, while there are some things that we can do in a tidal river that's as large as the Potomac, a lot of things are out of our hands.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess if you're having a recruitment issue, are you all attempting to rectify that? Of course, habitat would help, but are we trying to improve spawning substrate? Are you doing any strategic stocking? Is there anything being done there?
Yeah, so we do a little bit of stocking, and we focus really heavily on our systems that we're identifying as lacking recruitment for a certain year. So some years we do look at the Potomac and say, maybe recruitment's down. Let's try and bump up some numbers, and we can focus on, because the Potomac is so large, so we can break it down by some individual tributaries and some really historically productive spots. So we can target really good habitat with fish we stock. And that's typically what we do. We have a stocking program that we run annually. And I look at some of what the anglers are saying. I look at some of the habitat. I obviously look at my data that I've collected, and I target where I'm sending those fish based off of our population metrics, our habitat, and some feedback from the anglers, because I've got about 12 different rivers under me as the tidal black bass manager.
Right.
And so I sample about 7 of those a year. So I can't get to all of them. I do use a lot of local knowledge from the anglers to identify where we can stock some of these fish and where we can have the most effect.
Bailey and I are big on that. We love it when the anglers are involved. And I think since you're in the Southeast, you're stocking pure Floridas, correct?
We are not putting any Floridas in our rivers.
That was a fisheries joke. Don't worry about it. And I think what also is cool is, Bailey, 3 episodes in a row. Now it's getting me. 3 episodes in a row, we are using the word recruitment to describe what's happening in our fisheries, and are we getting enough fry in their survival to become an adult. And just I love asking this question, and some managers have it right off the top of their head, so don't feel bad if you say no, Ryan. But do you have an assessment of how long it takes a fish to actually recruit into the system and become an adult, from fry to adult? How long does that take?
We do for some of our fisheries, but we don't for a lot of them. But we do for like the Potomac or the Upper Bay.
Yeah, that's a tough one to get, and it's not a stagnant number, so I completely understand why you wouldn't have them for all of them. That makes sense. Bailey, you got a question?
I don't. No, I don't. This has been awesome. Like I said in the beginning, this was one of my favorite presentations last week, simply because it's coming at, like I was saying earlier, coming at the subject from a data and factual point of view versus just emotional. Um, and so I just on the Potomac specifically, we talked a little bit in person at the Black Bass Symposium of my desire to go fish Potomac, of simply just a learning aspect. I've never fished a tidal fishery, so hopefully we'll be able to make that linking up happen down the road, down there on the Potomac. But otherwise, man, this has been an incredible episode, and hopefully Steve and I, obviously Steve steers the ship over here, but I'll be bugging him every week and getting you back on the show here soon.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Ryan, you're an all-star. We're going to have to do it annually. We're going to have to go over this data, talk about how it's changing. Um, if we can't have you for a full episode, we can periodically have you pop in and give us an update. I assume we're going to do it for the team series as well, which will be fun because that's two anglers in the boat, and I don't really know the rules yet, so I'll have to read them. But I'll give you an update. I do want to, before we wrap the episode, we've been asking everybody. I'm going to ask you the same question. Can you tell us your favorite presentations from Black Bass 2025?
yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed the Forge one that I touched on a little bit, just because
Yeah, from Kyle.
yeah, it didn't really have a whole lot of management implications for me, but I thought it was just a really cool presentation and just how he put it together. Um, who else did I like? I really enjoyed some of the diversity presentations that Jim Long and Andrew Taylor did. They've been doing a lot of work in South Arkansas and Oklahoma, looking at diversity of bass species. And then, of course, I spent a couple years down in Arkansas, so I really enjoyed Jeremy Risley talking about the new program that they're bringing to Arkansas. Their trophy, they're essentially their version of Florida's and Texas's Share Lunker. So I'm really excited for those guys, and really happy to see what happens down in Arkansas in the next couple years.
Yep. All of them that you mentioned were great, and shows that you're a true fish head because you're picking out the talks that maybe don't have management implications, and definitely don't to the Potomac River, but
Yeah.
certainly are just entertaining to watch.
Yeah. I really enjoyed Adam Martin's too on Kentucky Lake and looking how they're improving spawning habitat in there. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even know that one was coming up next. I just happened to be in the room and he was coming up, and I was like, "Oh, this is perfect! I get to learn a little bit about Kentucky Lake. Never seen it, but I've got some of their data." So that one
Yeah.
was really good too.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being on the episode. Before we let you go, will you tell people how to get a hold of you? Email address? Is there a Facebook page for Maryland? Where can
Yeah,
people
so
find you?
you can find me if you search Maryland Tidal Black Bass. We've got a series of web pages that talk about our fishery, our management, the stocking. We have our tournament page up there. If you just search Maryland Tidal Bass, all that good stuff will pop up. If you're interested in chatting with me, you can find me at ryan.gary@maryland.gov. But I really appreciate just the opportunity to come on here. Talking fish is one of my favorite things to do. I think both of you guys provide a really good intersect between science and tournament angling and recreational angling, and of course to you, Steve, and MLF for the opportunity to work with this data set, because this is like nowhere else. It's an incredible data set, and I'm really excited to see what we can build and what we can learn from it, and just to gather some more data and hopefully have some fishery management implications down the road. So I really appreciate the opportunity, guys.
Heck yeah, man! Definitely looking forward to getting you back on here and seeing what comes down in the hopper for next year's data and different things you guys will be getting involved in.
Nice.
All right. Well, then everybody who's listening, travel to the Potomac, go smash them. Shallow water. You don't even need forward-facing sonar.
Love it. All right, folks, and that is going to do it for today's episode with Ryan and Steve. That was awesome.
Ryan
And we
brought
could have gone
it.
4 hours if you wanted to.
We could have went longer. I think that the next time we have him on, as he starts to dive into this data a little more, and then layers in 2026, and hopefully 2027, and we keep going with this process, he's going to unlock some nuggets. I think there's still so much information to understand about largemouth versus smallmouth, time of year, weather, habitat, depth. As he layers those in, you may have to tune in on YouTube because you're going to want to see the visuals, because he's going to get eventually so technical that he's going to have like the graphs and the charts and the pictures, because me and you aren't going to understand it without all that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna get pretty wild. Which he'd already presented some great visuals, which hopefully we can get our hands on and throw up on social media for the folks. But it's pretty dang intuitive, and it's only gonna get more intuitive, which is exactly what we need to better make decisions here, especially when we're talking about another living organism versus just angler theory, as I like to call it, which is never based on
Right.
anything besides opinion.
And I think, he told us behind the stage, he tells us, he's like a year and a half into his position in Maryland as the title black bass coordinator. And, he's in his just barely 30s. Ryan's going to be around for a long time in Maryland. And I told him, I said, dude, keep up the work you're doing. I've seen a lot of fisheries professionals across this country. He is top notch, and he's a young rising star. So I think we're going to look forward to 20 years of his influence on black bass management across the U.S.
Heck yeah, man. A
It'll be
great
great.
show. And if people have any questions on this show or things that maybe we didn't hit on from a different perspective that we might have missed, and you're willing to obviously talk about it in a civilized manner, send us a DM, send us an email, whether it's to the Sears Angler or to Steve's. Let us know, and obviously we'll bring it up on a future lake hotline. But Steve, a great show today, and looking forward to getting him back on here soon.
Absolutely. Can't wait, Bailey. Go smash them wherever you're going this weekend. I'm sure you're competing or doing something crazy. Go enjoy. And I know we're going to take this week off for Lake Hotline. So if you have a Lake Hotline question, Bailey and I are going to get back to those in future episodes, but send those to us as well. Not just comments about this episode. If you've got questions about anything fisheries related, send them to Lake Hotline, DM Bailey. He'll read them. He'll read them to me, and we'll answer them on the next episode.
Awesome. Folks, appreciate y'all as always. And we'll see you guys on the next one.